Heal Your Shit is a podcast for anyone curious about why life throws us curveballs. We're all about digging into the connections between mind, body, and soul, but we keep it real. Because, let's be honest, being human can be one wild ride. Once you understand your shit, healing it becomes a whole lot easier. Hello, welcome to our podcast, Heal Your Shit. So let's introduce ourselves.
Yes. My name is Olaf, and I'm both a certified coach, but primarily I work with de-armoring, inner child healing, and also energy healing. And I hold workshops and I have one-to-one sessions. I work with the depth of both the emotional body, the mental body, and the physical body.
And I'm Laura, and I'm trauma-informed coach. And I work with people to spot traumas in their life and how they affect their everyday living. Welcome to our first episode. And we're going to talk today about trauma, what it is, how to spot signs of trauma in your body, and in how the way you feel, and what you can do with it.
Yes.
Let's start maybe with the most important thing. Like, trauma is not something that happened to you. It's how you actually reacted to it.
Yeah.
That's not the event, but the feeling and the reaction.
Exactly. Right? And the response.
Yeah, the response
in your body and your physicality.
Yeah.
And if you could release it or not,
yes,
is also very important.
Yeah. And I feel like many times people are a little bit confused and they think that all stressful situations are traumatic, which is not correct, because a stressful situation, you can detach from it, and that's not trauma. Trauma is something that it's going to come back to you.
It's also about the integration or the completion.
Yeah.
Like if you've gone through something traumatic, but you got a closure.
Yeah.
Then it's sort of healed. But if you didn't get a closure, it could be a wound that you can carry that in your psyche, in your emotional body, or in your physical body. Yeah.
So we could say that each traumatic experience is stressful, but not every stressful situation is traumatic, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's different how we react as individuals on different events, what our proclivities are. So it affects us very differently.
That's true. Yeah. And also, I'm thinking now, as you said before when we talked about it, for example, most of those big traumas, they happen during our childhood, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard up to age of 8, that's when the big traumas happen. And I mean, for most of us, we don't even think about it. But things that happens before we have a language, those types of traumas, they're unaware for us. They're in the unconscious, but they can be so deeply held in the bodies, in the tissue. And they can affect our lives. And we can hold a lot of fear from that period of our lives.
And that's not conscious.
Exactly. Because everything before you have a language, you can't put it out into the world in language. So it's deeper. And those types of traumas often takes a lot of work to actually reach and to dare to feel those, because those can be so overwhelming.
But I'm thinking also about trauma, because obviously there are these events in our childhood that happen and we cannot do anything about it. So then our body goes either into flight or fight response, or we just collapse, basically. But there are also other traumas, obviously, that can happen during your lifetime that are related to war, to maybe an assault. It can be an accident, right? So it's not just childhood, but it can happen in other parts of your life.
Yeah, and as I understand it, both, you're bringing up the fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, of course. So that could actually happen. So we get into either the parasympathetic shutdown mode, we don't want to feel, or we get into the more activated flight, running away, or fight, fighting it. But it's also connected to, if you're in a trauma as an adult, it could bring up a lot of things from your childhood as well.
That's true.
Yeah.
And also, like, let's think about another aspect of it, which is like most of our traumas that happen later in our adulthood
Yeah.
are reflection of trauma from our childhood. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's the way I view it also. Like, it's almost as a life is calling for healing. So if you always felt like abandoned as a child, it's almost like you're going to have a theme that runs up into your adulthood. Like, you run into these abandonment issues over and over again. Or if you never feel seen, or you never felt heard.
Yes.
That's going to replay until you choose to, like, instead of running for it to get what you need out there, or you imagine that you need out there, you need to turn back and give that to yourself and actually allow yourself to feel that pain, feel that loneliness, feel that hurt, and really go through a grief of sorts.
Yeah, that's beautiful, I think, going through that process. But I would like to just take a step back, because I feel like many people still need some real examples, like, what can it be? Like, what things that happened in my childhood? And I can give that example that's very personal.
Yeah.
Like my mother, for example, didn't breastfeed me, which created a very unconscious trauma of being rejected by my own mom, right? So that theme, as you said, like the theme that's, repeating itself in your life until you just become conscious about it and work with it. That's very powerful, because when you realize it, that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
You can really do the work.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, talking about your example, it's very fascinating, because that's also, it brings out, like, we can go as deep as we want in this. And I mean, also, how do you receive nourishment in your life? Like, that's the first way of connecting with the mother and receiving nourishment. So it's a lot in the mouth also. Like, how do I, when I receive nourishment, can I let it fully in, or do I become suspicious? So that kind of, reasoning is always very helpful to look at these issues, because they run so deep in us, and often unconsciously also.
So it can, like, this kind of trauma can make it hard for you to receive love.
Yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting angle, but that's totally makes sense.
Because then it's also, we could be in this push-pull dynamic. Like, this is what we want, that we go for it with a lot of energy and strength, and then we get it. We're like, it's too much. I need to push it out.
Take it away from me.
Take it away. It's like, or become very suspicious. Like, maybe I have this now, but I can't trust it.
It's very temporary.
Yeah, exactly.
They're gonna take it away from you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I can relate to that. But also, like, the feel, it's, again, like, we're talking about the feeling. So the child unconsciously, or consciously maybe, but it's kept in our unconscious mind, feels like, I'm not lovable enough.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
That's another feeling that comes to my mind when I think about that trauma.
Yeah, and as we were speaking about before, like, that can, like, basically evolve, like, the hungry ghost syndrome. Like, we keep looking for it in the world, but we can really never really find it. We can taste it, but then it goes away, and then we keep going for it
until we figure it out.
And then that's also the river of 1,000 tears, to leave that hunting and to go back and to sit deeper inside ourselves in a way.
With acceptance.
Yes. Yes, allowing it all.
But I'm also, like, thinking about story, like, we both love Gabor Maté.
Yeah.
And he shared his personal story in his books, how he felt rejected in a very early childhood when his mother, they were separated basically for a short time. It was 1 month, but still impacted him in a huge way. And it was also times of war. So there's another traumatic event that's occurring in that time. And he claimed that these events actually influenced his health. Like, he has ADHD,
Yeah.
I also reached out to read his book because of my daughter having ADHD, and I wanted to figure it out. And it is so true that there must be some trauma to occur for ADHD to happen.
Yes.
Because my daughter had that trauma where she felt very early in her childhood abandoned by her father.
Yeah. So what I like to get into there, I feel it's like ADHD and other diagnoses can be also coping strategies.
Yeah.
That we keep running or we keep busy, or it's hard to focus and stuff like that. It's hard to sit down, because if you sit down, you meet yourself and you meet that sense of uncomfortability. It's like, no, I need to run. I need to get up and do something. So a lot of these healing modalities is both, feeling stuff, but also allowing more energy to move in the body.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a mix of, feeling, seeing, getting in touch with the memories, getting in touch with grief, getting in touch with lack, anger, and expressing that and feeling the body wants to maybe move and release some of that up, like the tight energy or pent energy in the system. Yeah.
Makes sense. And you know what, like another thing that comes to me, I don't know if you've heard that story about orphanages where babies cry and that's like their way of communicating.
Yeah.
And they don't get help. And in that moment they shut down, and when you go in orphanages and they don't get that help, the babies don't cry.
Yeah.
Which, like, it's heartbreaking. When I read that story, I think I was crying when I saw that. It's heavy.
It is heavy. And I mean that we come so completely vulnerable into this world, and we need to be held, seen, nurtured. And, that goes all the way into attuned. And most of us haven't been feeling that attunement from our parents. Like I feel you, and I feel you feeling me, like Thomas Hübel is talking about. And that deep sense of like, I'm okay as I am. Yeah. Because if I'm not okay as I am, and you're an adult, I'm going to do whatever it takes for me to please you. So I make sure that I'm okay with you and you take care of me. Because otherwise, as a child, especially as an infant or a small child, we're so dependent. We don't have a choice. I depend on you for my survival if you're my mother.
So therefore, when trauma happens in the childhood, and for example, like there's a sort of abuse, is it physical or emotional even, I'm thinking like a child needs to use some coping mechanism because like you naturally want to or feel the loss for your parents or for caregivers.
Exactly. And that's also where the whole fragmentation comes in. Because if you're with a parent, right, and you're completely dependent on them, and they do something that to hurt you or to distance themselves from you, or they beat you or something like that. So a part of you is going to go and want to become independent. Like, I don't need my father. I don't need my mother. Mm-hmm. I need to fend off by myself. But another part is always going to reach for that connection, like the hope for, oh, I want to do this healing with my father. I want to be seen by my daddy. I want to. So that's a split. And that's also what you later on work with IFS to actually bring these parts together, or at least you speak to them and let them speak to each other. So you bring those parts up into the conscious that's otherwise in your unconscious mind and basically ruling your life in a way.
So you bring them back to the surface.
Yeah, yeah. And with love, of course, and with caring. Acceptance. Because otherwise it's so easy in this kind of work, like, I need to heal now. And it's like, I don't want that part. But that's what created that part from the beginning. So that part needs to be tended to and really nourished and nurtured to also to be able to trust you.
I'm also thinking right now about another aspect, because when people go through later for healing and healing these traumas, there's a lot of resentment and anger at the very beginning. to the people who caused you that trauma. When we work through these traumas, we need to be also conscious about the fact that our parents also went through some traumas, right?
Yeah. So that's basically the whole ancestral line or the lineage that we carry with us. Like with me, I see that, like, I think it was my great grandfather on my father's side, that he left the whole family and disappeared to America. And that's, I feel it's a wound that's been carried through the generations of, like, you know, a bit of shutdown maybe, or like a disconnect. And I feel that needs to be healed in me, in my generation, so I can be with my son and he feels seen and heard, appreciated, because that's what I feel from my father's line. It's a bit of shutdown, numbness, denial. And also, yeah, that has also implications for my life.
Yeah, of course.
Until I heal it, in a way.
I think that's another topic that we want to talk about in the next episode, which is generational trauma, which is another amazing and interesting topic. Do you have any other ideas about, like, what trauma is not, so people can actually distinguish, like, oh yes, this is trauma and this is not trauma?
For me, it's all about, coming, as I was talking about before, like coming to resolution, like coming to a completion of an experience. And sometimes our parents didn't have the tool to complete if they caused us harm, or they, like, go to your room. And just that being, like, locked into your room can be a trauma of such. But then it could be like these small conflicts. Some parts, like, this didn't cause me that deep trauma. It just first caused me hurt in the moment. But then I could go to a sibling and talk about it or something.
Yeah.
And and then it could be resolved and it doesn't go as deep. But it also could be patterns. That's not, like, maybe trauma per se. So it's a somatic definition. And for me, it's like, I could see in my life, like, I've always felt a bit, like, small, unseen. So I needed to, like, feel stronger. First, I read all these series about Superman and Spider-Man because I wanted them to come and save me. But later on in my life, I started doing Thai boxing and like things like that for me to feel strong and empowered. Even though it wasn't one trauma, it was like a series of events that sort of brought that for me. And that also, I feel appreciation for exploring that. So, like, the trauma can also give you something, or
like a
lesson or a direction. Or if you always been bullied as a child or something, maybe you get, like, a lot of energy to go and create your own reality in a way, and to go forth to become strong and become maybe a business leader or something. But then that could also
flip.
Yeah, flip, of course.
I think there's a very interesting documentary about Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't know if you've seen that one. Yeah. It is crazy. And, like, when I was watching it, I was thinking, like, wow, so much trauma, in the childhood.
Yeah.
And what's happened for Arnold is, like, he totally shut down his emotional part because he said, like, I couldn't grieve. My father died, my brother died, I couldn't grieve. And it shows you how you can really reach, like, the peak of success, for example, but that's, like, driven by traumatic events.
Exactly. And I think he's like, yeah, just do it. Just go for it. And you can feel that energy is, like, so forceful. And it's not, like, done with care, with love. It's just like, go out there, do it, like, grab it. Just wrestle it down, kill it. And I mean, yeah, sure, you can do that, but do you feel like love, tenderness? Probably not,
No, it doesn't feel tender to me.
No, it's like, and would you like to be in a relationship with a person like that? Well, that would bring up a lot of implications, wouldn't it?
That would be rough.
That would be a rough ride, huh?
Yeah, so, but it's so interesting to see, like, how this can affect lives in a very different way, because you have two kids in that family and they reacted totally in a different way. And I'm thinking, like, also, like, what is trauma for one person will not be trauma for the other. Yeah. So I have an example, like, a lost animal, like, as a child.
Yeah.
So it depends how your parents would react to it when they finally found you, and like to put some kind of safety, like, like transfer that safety to you. But if they didn't, if they said, oh, nothing happened, it's just,
Yeah. And that's also what I would call a small T. That's a lot of like a little trauma that a lot of us been through, including myself. And if we met by a person or a mother or a father that's attuned to us and our needs and like see us and pick us up and hold us until we're done, and like maybe we need to release or something happens to the body, then that could be healed at that instant. But for most of us, it's like, oh, I found you. Come on, let's go. And it's like we're stuck with this feeling of desertion or loneliness or utter despair, and we don't get to release that. And that tends to store in the body or in the psyche in some way until we're like, feel it, heal it.
That's actually interesting for me because that happened to me.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't remember it. I just heard the stories, so I don't know how my mother reacted to it. So this is not something I remember, but I guess it has been kind of traumatic to be lost.
Yeah, many of those memories also can be suppressed and denied, or like working with a lot of people that's had a bad childhood, you can see that a lot of the childhood is gone, like the memories are not there, but that's actually a protection mechanism.
Right.
Yeah, so you're like, no, it's not there. It was all good, but then when you do the deep work, those things, the memories can actually surface either as like pictures or just like emotional residue that comes up, or the body just like,
Yeah, that's another interesting topic, actually, because we do store, and that's like scientifically proven, that we do store these traumas in our body, in our cells. And it can actually show up as a disease.
Oh, yeah.
As a depression.
Yeah.
And in many other ways. So.
And just like you talking about that reminds me about Gabor Maté in his book. He also makes the connection between being a pleaser, a super nice person, and getting different muscular diseases.
Muscular, you mean?
Yeah, atrophy.
Atrophy,
Atrophy. So it's a way that the body responds to something that's off. If you're not in your power, but you try to please, and you please your whole life, you get Parkinson's or a disease like that.
That shows up in a specific part of your life. It is very much connected to some unresolved trauma.
Yeah.
So I've been through that as well. And I feel like working with the trauma helped me to get out of it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
So.
And to feel empowered, because depression is a collapse in the system. So it's a giving up, and it's like this heavy energy. So you need like to energize the system, actually both feeling it, but then energizing and then getting into contact, because maybe there's some anger there that needs to come out, or whatever. Sadness, whatever, you need to start peaking and doing the work for that to surface.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And I'm also thinking right now about all the other traumas. So like the sexual abuse, for example.
Yeah.
That's a huge traumatic event. And I've never experienced that, so I don't want to talk put myself as an expert in that, because it must be a very hard event for you. But there are tools like, for example, completion process that help to release that. We're both like huge fans of TS1, and I feel any kind of trauma, but also like this kind of trauma when you're an adult or not, maybe it happened earlier, are amazing tools to cope with that.
Yeah, and actually I haven't been exposed to that either, but what comes up is also the work of Peter Levine, where he talks about, experiments if they have a mouse in a cage, and there comes, a snake comes in, and then the mouse gets to run away, and then the mouse is fine. But if you hold the mouse and the snake comes, like you entrap it in somehow, and it doesn't get to move. It gets traumatized and just, destroyed. It's so nervous. That also shows the importance of like moving and shaking and like actually running away from the situation or fighting through a situation. In some ways solves that pressure on your body. Otherwise it tends to store.
Yeah. But since we're talking about different ways of coping with it, how can you spot trauma? Like, that's one question.
If you've been exposed to trauma, one way could be like you're hypervigilant, or you could be like you're always super aware of your surroundings and seeing threats. So it's like, oh, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Or you react on high sounds, something's dropping, and you're like, what was that? Yeah. Like, you can see that with war veterans. Like 50 years after they've been to Vietnam, I met the guy, as soon as it was a high sound, he was just jumping and very nervous. And that's a typical expression of a wound that hasn't been healed and integrated, that's stored in the body, in the physicality of that person.
I'm also thinking about other behaviors that can also show that maybe there's a trauma there. Like, for example, self-destructive behaviors. So like getting into drugs, addicted to alcohol, sex as well, right? Like, or random sex. All these like behavioral patterns, that could be also it.
Yeah, a lot of that is numbing down. Don't want to feel, want to be saved by somebody else, get away from yourself, fill your cup from somebody else. Because that's also a way of getting away from these feelings of maybe worthlessness or loneliness. And then we need to, run away. So
this is a way to numb.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to feel it anymore, so I'm going to drink myself to death. It's a coping mechanism.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Another thing is like being constantly on guard, as you said, like also like or defensive.
Yes.
Like, people don't mean anything wrong, but you become defensive every time, like just covering yourself and trying to, fight back.
Exactly. Or you interpret every situation.
Right.
They're like, oh, they probably meant that. They probably meant that I did a bad job. And they didn't mean that at all. But you have that with you and you're holding that within you. So you interpret that situation. And then you come to those situations over and over again. And then it's like, aha, it's something within me. It's not out there.
Yeah. So also like the overthinking. Like, I see that a lot. Thinking. What do they mean? Maybe they're like angry with me, like that kind of attitude towards other people. I'm like, okay, let's just relax about it for a second.
Yeah, because that's also the hypervigilant and try to be safe. And that's also a lot of the healing process is not to try to find safety out there, but to try to find safety inside. And then that's the big shift. Because otherwise you're running for safety, you do everything, you use every object in your life to fill you up.
Yeah.
But then you're like a vampire drinking from every other source instead of actually showing up. Because how can I be with you and feel you if I need you to fill me up?
So if I need things from you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that doesn't work, right? No. There's a flow of energy between people. Exactly. And that should be a flow.
Exactly.
Well, give me that.
Otherwise, it's all the pull, push dynamic. And that, as most of us know, it's quite
never going to work. Yeah.
It's a lot of drama in there.
There's a lot of drama. But I'm also thinking like another thing is like unexplained pains, and also like diseases that are not really diseases. It happened to me, for example. The doctor could not diagnose me. They did all the tests, like, we don't know what's up with you.
Yeah.
And then I did the work, inner work. I was like, oh, okay, that was it.
Yeah. What comes up to me now, it's maybe not related directly to disease, but it could be. So if you, for example, been a nice child all your life and not allowed to have your voice in the world and been silent by your parents, it tends to get stuck in the throat because your voice is not allowed. So then one way of that is to actually starting to express yourself, express your truth, maybe start singing or sounding, because if that goes very deep, it's like you're almost like a talking head because you're not okay to be. So you disconnect from your body. And if you disconnect from your body's way of talking to you is through giving you symptoms. So that could be a way where disease comes in. It's like, I want to be seen, I want to be heard. And then if you don't start doing that work, it's your body's basically gonna force you to it.
Yeah, in one way or another.
In one way or the other. Yeah.
But when you said that, it reminded me of our previous talks about like also the birth.
Yeah.
Because you spoke about the chakra, right? What about birth? That's a trauma.
Yeah. And we were talking about C-section, for example. I mean, not everybody might agree on this, but when you're conscious, even if you don't have a language, and you're a feeling human being with enormous sensibility and sensitivity, and birth is a process of going through that deep, safe haven into, going through the birth canal and coming out into life and taking your first scream, like being heard in the world. And if that is stopped in some way, it might be that could affect the way that you're showing up in the world.
Yeah. And I can see that also, like, because so many kids, when they come from C-section, they have sensory problems, right? Like, I remember my best friend's son had this problem with walking barefoot. It's a sensory problem. And they said it's because of the C-section, most probably.
Yeah, and it could also be like these hormones,
right?
And those like connection between the mother and child, that could be disrupted. And I mean, for me, I went through a rebirthing process and got to experience my first breath again. And it was just like, wow, all my senses opened up and, the feeling of being alive. It's just, it's quite extraordinary how those experiences can color us. Yeah.
It sounds kind of mind-blowing to me. I told you the other time that I had this vision while I was in a Reiki massage that I was in the womb holding myself and then holding my own child. It was a very powerful visualization. So I was very shocked about feeling that. And I think it was LSD research. And the scientists were checking people who are taking LSD in a safe environment to see how they feel and so on. And there were so many reports of the womb. And it's actually crazy because they could recall it. They could feel the same way they felt in the womb. And that's mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research going on with psychedelics, both mushrooms and psilocybin and MDMA and LSD. And I mean, what that could do is like a lot of us walk around as talking heads, but will we actually induce or take those kind of drugs or whatever you call it, it puts us in states and deeper contact with things that we cannot consciously get in touch with often, except through maybe breath work or that kind of, or deep meditation. But that's a shortcut. But then everything can be used as a drug, it can be misused. So it's a word of caution for using. But this could be, I think it's going to be an interesting road to see where it leads. A lot of healing connected to that.
As we were talking about different ways of, working with trauma, you mentioned breath work.
Yeah.
I find it very powerful.
Yeah.
It's like physically releasing these blockages, right?
Yeah. And it's also about, I mean, it's a yogish practice since thousands of years. But I think, originally it was like, getting in contact with what some call kumbhaka. It's like the state between breaths.
Yeah.
And the silencing of the mind. So that, I think that was one of the original intents. But, with breath work, you can also, release a lot of stagnant energy and stuff like that. So it's got to be like a multi-purpose. It's cleansing of the brain as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chemicals, yeah.
I think for me, the most powerful breath work was when I saw death in front of me twice in a week. You remember that?
Wow.
And I came here to you and to a workshop, and there was breath work, and I got shivers,
Yes.
and I started to shake, and I couldn't control it, and it was just, I felt like it was like cleansing,
Yeah.
the cleaning of the energy, because for me it was traumatic to see that, and I hit the deer, so that was one experience which made me feel terrible. And that breath work took it out, like to the surface, and I could just feel it, how it's like getting out of my body,
Yes.
you know, like shaking.
Yes. And that's pineal gland. It's
Pineal
it
gland,
calcifies the pineal gland. It's also works with your blood, you know, because we tend to be more acidic. I've been doing a lot of the Wim Hof breathing as well, and trying different holotropic breaths and
Yeah,
things like that.
there's a very interesting book about breathing. It's called Breathe. Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
And it talks about like how we actually forgot how to breathe properly. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
We don't know anymore how to breathe.
Yeah, and people tend to hold the breath very shallow, and then you're a lot in your mind. I mean, for me, it was a process of connecting to my lower belly breaths, and just that I could so much be deeper in my body and more grounded, more present, being with my emotions. Because if you're up here all the time, you tend to just fly away and never like really land on this earth.
It's also like very mind concentrated. Like the mind is talking all the time. There's no feeling. The feelings are stuck here, right?
Yeah, and you can't, as Krishna does say, you can't think yourself out of a prison made by thought.
Nah, that's lazy.
I love that.
I love that quote too. So we said, okay, there's breath work. So what you can do, I find very powerful journaling. Yeah. So despite it's like something that you do consciously, your subconscious helps you, you know, give it a shape somehow. So like even if it's something very deep and you might not be able to realize through journaling a very deep trauma, but you can see a pattern.
Yeah.
You can, like, if you do it every day and you're coping, for example, with depression, you can see a pattern of thoughts, like,
yeah,
and that's like a good starting point, I guess.
Yeah, and I love sharing, like the really deep share. We hold our like space for ourselves to have like some really good friend that can just really hold space, and you take turns. For me, that's a beautiful way of like putting out there what's going on inside myself and being seen and heard and felt in that and mirrored. Yeah. So that's another way. If you need to really go deep, it's like working with the patterns, the coping mechanisms, the family dynamic, and also the IFS, like we're talking about, or inner child healing, but also de-armoring to get physical in the body with both feeling of being held and loved, but also challenged physically. And like, that could be quite intense. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like in the process, because many times that's what happened to me. I totally shut down when I got depressed. Yeah. I didn't reach out to my friends. I didn't tell my family. I shut down. And I felt like I'm alone in this and I have to cope with this by myself, which is, I think, one of the biggest kind of mistakes for like when you feel like, oh, you have to do it by yourself. Yeah. No, there are people who can or will help you, right? For me, it was crucial to go to therapy.
Oh, yeah.
Second person, holding space for you, as you said, mirroring and helping you figure out what's happening, why, right?
Yeah, that could be such a healing paradox also. Like some of the healing, we need to do by ourselves, but there can be such a lot of shame around that. Like, I shouldn't ask for help, but it's so important to reach out. And I find challenging myself in that because I've also had that withdrawal pattern. But then I'm conscious of, okay, my pattern is to withdraw. So I need also to call out to somebody and say, okay, can you hold space for me, or listen to me, or actually go and see somebody, or so I just don't isolate myself.
Yeah.
Because that's also, that also becomes stagnant, and yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges in like nowadays, because we are not living like before, and we're not a tribe anymore, and we are kind of alone in our houses, like the screen is there, and yes, you can call your friends, but it's not the same as it used to be. So that's a huge challenge to get that.
Yeah, so find your tribe.
Find your tribe.
Because it's also so. I found that after, we're gonna get into this later, but after my accident, I basically have to shift my whole friend circle because I wasn't being able to be met on the level that I felt I needed to be met. For people to hear my authentic truth and for them to share their authentic truth and be in pain together, not just pleasing and like, oh, we're so nice to each other. It's like, enough of that bullshit, I needed to be raw and real. I mean, we can have fun and we can do all kinds of crazy stuff, but at the end of the day, I need to feel that my friends are there in the depth and they're interested in meeting me on that level.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting what you just said. And I feel many times in life when we actually go for this shift, so when we work with IFS, with coaching, therapy, whatever, we lose some people in our lives because it's not possible anymore. Because some relationships we create, they're based on trauma.
Oh yeah, trauma bonding for sure. And when you shift that frequency and you're not willing to play along and play that game, that's gonna trigger them as hell. If you can't meet me, if we can't have this conversation, or if we can't communicate around this, it's just not gonna go deeper. And it's just like the energy of the relationships goes out.
Yeah, exactly. Because we tend to replay, like, for example, let's say we had a traumatic relationship, because it can be also about the relationship, right, with one of our parents. And we tend to replay that when it's not taken care of, right?
Oh, yeah.
Then we tend to get into relationships and have partners that reflect that. So we can do that lesson, right?
Exactly. A lot of people that had parents, one of the two parents that were alcoholic, either becomes alcoholic themselves or meet the partner that's alcoholic. It's almost like life is calling us for that healing of that aspect. And that needs to be integrated before you can move along. And that's a painful process. But the alternative is you keep replaying the same lesson over and over again, different places, different faces, but the same learning.
Yeah. I had that conversation with somebody who reached out to me, and she was hoping that somebody's going to come and it's going to be different than her partner, and it's going to change the game. And I was saying, like, well, I feel that there's a need to heal something before you can think about next partner. And so you don't actually attract the same kind of people who will, put you on a trajectory towards that wound, towards that trauma.
And otherwise you're just diving into the next projective game, like you're going to be this for me, you're going to save me, or whatever, your dynamic is. And that's not empowerment.
No. And that's why I always encourage people, like, go to therapy, go to energy healing, coaching, do something, speak with somebody, do the journaling, work with art. And
there's a lot of modalities out there, and you have to find the ones that resonate with you, of course, and where you at in your healing process. Because otherwise, what tends to happen is, we put it inside ourselves and we gather until we can't take it anymore because it becomes unbearable. And then we have a sort of a crackdown or something.
Oh,
cat is coming up here.
The cat is here and he's taking over this podcast.
He's taking over the podcast. It's like my turn now.
Stop that shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's for most of us, or a lot of us. We need to go through a lot of intense things in life to actually start the healing process. Because otherwise, we keep it together, and in the boxes, keeping it safe, playing small.
Yeah, and also, like, as we mentioned, different modalities of healing. I think that's important to say. Each person is different, and you're not always ready to different levels of healing, right? So sometimes it might be hard, like it might be good to start small, step by step, and then with those baby steps, you arrive to maybe armory.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's also like that in the spiritual field, I feel. Like I was listening to Gangaji the other day, and her advice is always, stop. And some people are not just there to be able to stop, that you need to do some breath work, or you need to do some yoga, or you need to do like the first steps before you're there. And also after that, people can get stuck in that, just stopping all the time. Instead of just, okay, now I need to listen to my inner voice and see where that takes me. Like that still voice from within.
And also not overdo it, because there's another tendency that I'm going to do yoga, workshop, meditation, therapy, coaching, IFS, completion process, everything at the same time. No, take it easy.
Yeah, exactly. Because otherwise that becomes the new addiction.
Right?
Yeah. That I'm going to go somewhere, I'm going to be healed. And it's more about, coming to this peace within and be able to be soft with ourselves and be tender and changing that, so that the inner dialogue isn't judging and like pushing us and attacking us, but a more calm, like supportive inside does miracles for us.
Yeah. With that positive accent, let's wrap this up.
Yes.
And thank you so much. And thank you for listening.
Thank you.
I hope they enjoyed it.
And thank you, Laura.
Yeah, thank you. I hope that this helped, and hit the button to subscribe. And we're going to come with more insights.
See you soon.
See you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.